James Frey is like making this up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, yes, that's part of it. But then to go on and claim like, oh, well, it's just literature. It's like, no, the stuff of literature isn't made up from just like, it's just because it's a story. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't just kind of flip it. And Minhaj kind of does the same thing when he relies on this idea of emotional truths, which is sort of the classic, what I would call the classic hoaxer's gambit, which is sort of like, well, it might not be totally true, but it's emotionally true to me. And people will insist on that over and over. And even Kevin Young, who wrote that book a while ago, before obviously any of this stuff came out, consistently, like he cites over and over again people saying like, oh, it's just an emotional truth. It's okay because it's emotionally true.
Well, it's like, it feels to me too like Frey is the first part of a generation of hoaxers who can't just pull the ripcord at the end and be like, you got me. Or alternatively, gotcha, you fell for it. You know, this was the P.T. Barnum exit, like, haha, you didn't know what the egress was. Yeah. Right? And who wants to still have the credibility that they had when they were sitting pretty on this, you know, completely nonfiction memoir full of bullshit. In their post life, and to be accepted for their apology and continue to be considered like a peer of the literary community. I think it's insulting to like say like, hey, treat this as literature, because you don't get to say that about yourself. You know, someone else calls you literature. It's like that gets back to the whole idea of being a reporter first and then being a journalist, or being a comedian first, then being a truth teller of a comedian or whatever. That write the book, be a writer first, and then let other people, let the world worry about whether you're literature or not. Like,
yeah. This is from the New Yorker. Minhaj described his work as the dynamic range that theater and storytelling and comedy allow you to explore. Does that mean audiences should expect his words on stage to stringently hew to the facts on the ground? The slipperiness of memoir finds a new dimension when it's played for laughs in front of a crowd. And then she says, it's not opinion journalism. And I think that's, maybe we can say that. Comedians might not be comfortable calling themselves anything but comedians, but a number of them, Minhaj included, have inserted themselves pointedly into political conversation. They've become the oddball public intellectuals of our time. And in informing the public, they assume a certain status as moral arbiters. When fibs are told to prove a social point rather than elicit an easy laugh, does their moral weight change? And I just think that's very like that to sort of like, bring us all the way back around. Yeah. All of these stories sort of, obviously they're not comedians. I don't know if we think Hasan Minhaj is a comedian, but
I'll give him that.
They are, I think, in their own ways, assuming a different status. Like they're trying to do something else, right? They're not just trying to tell their story. They're not trying to tell their truth. They're trying to, like she says, assume a certain status as a moral arbiter.
Right.
And in doing so, you assume a different kind of responsibility.
What's interesting to me in a discussion of a comedian is that the idea that laughter is kind of downgraded to like this, an easy laugh, a cheap like alternative to the gravitas of the moral arbiter. And this is something like my guess on the Hasan Minhaj thing is that if the jokes were funnier, then the veracity of them wouldn't even come into play. We kind of discount the function of laughter and what is actually happening, and overturning expectation and transmuting what could be horrible things into a feeling of momentary joy, that doesn't even have a descriptor beyond laughing. Like I was trying to think the other day about what the adjective form of laughing is. Like when you're laughing, what are you feeling? Mm-hmm. Like I guess amusement, but that's a noun. Laughter should be enough. Like, why is laughter an alternative to, why doesn't laughter have its own fucking moral weight in this topsy-turvy, amoral, godless society we call Canada?
Well, US. I think even like outside of the comedic value, I think that, and this is again, while I'll side with the New Yorker on this, is that Minhaj is like in his act And I think this is the same thing that these memoirists, or whatever we want to call them, are also leaning on, is that they are making a claim to authenticity. Like they're saying, like, I am allowed to make these jokes, or I am saying this, or I am telling you this because this is authentic. This happened to me.
Right.
And you're assuming a different status. I think what's interesting is, like, there was the Hasan Minhaj. I keep saying him like Nicki Minaj. Minhaj, he like clapped back in a very. If you want to see an example of like how his stand up goes, just watch his like clapback video.
I guess I have seen it. His
I mean, it's extremely like sit down, chuckle fucks, like like vibe. And it's like a 21-minute YouTube video, which is far too long for a YouTube video.
They get way longer than that, Liz.
And he like brings his receipts, but it's funny because he presents all these quotes, and he's like, no, this is what I said. And it's a tape of, what he said to the New York, and he's like, they took it out of context, da-da-da-da-da-da, and he's, saying all this stuff. And, you brought up Janet Malcolm, and watching this clapback video, if we want to, like, again, bring it all the way back around before we sign off, is like watching a subject of a takedown piece about whether or not they were true or false reminds me so much of the journalist and the murderer, and watching a subject take issue with the kind of, I don't know, unstable or the kind of sense of betrayal that he felt at how his words were being taken out, at how his truth was being taken out of context by the journalist. It was like it was like almost like too looping for me to kind of get my head around. But I think is really indicative of the kind of, people like the idea that if you're, they're just saying your story, that's like the end all be all. And it's just like maybe not as stable of a narrative position as maybe people think it is.
It's not. And I think, in relation to all of these different things, the memoirist and Hasan Minhaj, one thing that I've always been firmly a believer of is that, like, if you're funny enough, and you can replace funny with whatever, like talent that you would need to be one of these memoirists, though I think that's a little bit different. But like with Minhaj in particular, like if you're a comedian, being funny should be your absolute primary goal. Truth telling, if we're talking Arnold Palmer's here, like that should be like, it should be like 70% funny, 80% funny, 20% truth telling. Because when those ratios get reversed or lopsided in some way, you end up being someone who needs to tell the truth. Because if you're a truth teller, it needs to be truthful.
You've lost the jester's privilege.
Exactly. Yeah. You've lost the jester's privilege, and I think it should be a cautionary tale. Yeah. It's I know I saw the PTSD flicker into your eyes with that one. It should be a cautionary tale because it's like, that's all this shit, man. Don't get fucking lost in the sauce,
right.
Well,
if you're going to stick your neck out so far and be a moral arbiter for something, you have to have every screw in, every nail, like, filed down smooth to the surface, flush. You cannot have anything that people can attack you with,
Yeah.
Like,
and
you
that's
have to have
just
everything
impossible.
iron tight. Right. And so don't assert yourself as a fucking moral arbiter, Or I mean, this is not you, I'm sorry.
No, Liz,
I don't think I do, but
no, exactly. Like, do the work,
of being funny.
Right?
Because if they're funny, they let you do it.
Yeah.